The Crimson Convergence ceremony had been underway for 2 hours when Vampire King Arcalian Dravenheart first felt it. A pull in his chest so violent it staggered him mid-chant. "Your Majesty!" High Counselor Velthus stepped forward, concern flickering across his pale features. "Are you unwell?" Arcalian gripped the edge of the obsidian altar, his ceremonial rings scraping against stone. The sensation came again, stronger this time. Not pain exactly, but something far more primal. It felt as though invisible claws had hooked themselves behind his ribs, dragging downward with savage insistence. "I'm fine," he managed, though his voice came out strained. The grand chamber was filled with nearly 800 nobles, vampire lords from every bloodline, their crimson eyes fixed on him as he renewed the ancient bond between king and throne. He couldn't leave, not during the convergence, not in front of the entire Dominion. Another pull. So fierce his vision darkened at the edges. "Down." Something ancient whispered through his blood. "Go down, my king." Velthus moved closer, his tone careful. "Perhaps we should pause the ritual." "No." Arcalian forced himself upright, but his predatory instincts, honed over 3 centuries, were screaming at him with a desperation he'd never known. His fangs ached, his pulse thundered. Every fiber of his immortal body demanded he move. Now. "Continue the ceremony," he commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "I will return shortly." He descended from the dais, and the room erupted in confused whispers as the Vampire King abandoned his own sacred rite, pulled toward something buried deep beneath the town hall, something that should not be calling to him at all. I stopped counting days after the first year. Time loses meaning when you live in absolute darkness, when the only sound is water dripping somewhere to your left and your own breathing echoing off stone walls you can't see. They threw me down here when I was 15. I don't know why I'm still alive. Sometimes I think I should be grateful for the darkness. It hides what I've become, the way my eyes glow now, casting faint blue-violet light that shouldn't exist. The way my skin has grown so pale it's almost translucent. The way I can feel energy moving through the earth above me, pulsing with life I can never touch. I was dying tonight. I could feel it in the way my heartbeat had slowed, in the cold spreading through my limbs. 7 years of surviving on dripping water, and whatever strange sustenance my body pulled from the air itself, and it was finally ending. Then I felt him coming. The footsteps were distant at first, echoing through sealed corridors that hadn't been opened in decades. I pressed myself against the far wall of my prison, my breath catching. No one ever came down here. That was the point. Stone scraped against stone, ancient locks breaking, the sound of something heavy being forced open with inhuman strength. Light flooded the chamber, torchlight, blinding after so many years, and I threw my arm across my face with a gasp. My eyes burned. My whole body recoiled from the sudden brightness. "Merciful shadows," a voice breathed. Male, deep, carrying an authority that made even the darkness seem to bend. I lowered my arm slowly, squinting through the pain, and saw him. He stood in the doorway like something out of the old stories, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders, and eyes that gleamed crimson in the torchlight. He wore ceremonial robes of deep emerald and black, embroidered with symbols I vaguely recognized. Vampire nobility, the highest kind. His gaze locked onto mine, and the air between us seemed to crack with electricity. For a moment, neither of us moved. I watched his expression shift from shock to something darker, something that made my pulse spike with an emotion I couldn't name. His nostrils flared. His jaw tightened. The hand gripping the torch began to shake. "You!" he whispered, and the words sounded like a revelation, like a curse. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a rasp. "Please!" I didn't even know what I was asking for. Mercy? Death? An explanation for why, after 7 years of abandonment, someone had finally found me? He moved then, crossing the chamber in 3 long strides. I flinched back, but he didn't touch me. Instead, he knelt in front of me, his eyes scanning my face, my glowing eyes, the sharp angles of my half-starved body. Up close, I could see the tension in every line of his frame, the way his hands clenched and unclenched, as though fighting the urge to reach for me. "What is your name?" His voice was rough, barely controlled. "Elowen," I managed. "Elowen Varkaris." Something flickered across his face. Recognition? No. Something deeper. His hand moved to his chest, pressing against his ribs, as though he could feel the same pull that had dragged him down here. "Who did this to you?" The question came out as a growl. "Who buried you here? I don't—" My throat closed. "The council. They said I was cursed. Dangerous." His expression went cold, predatory. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute command. "No one will touch you again. Do you understand me?" He held my gaze, and something in his eyes made my broken heart stutter. "You are under my protection now. The protection of the Vampire King." I stared at him, this stranger who had followed some inexplicable instinct into my tomb. "Why?" His jaw clenched. He looked at me as though the answer terrified him. "Because you're mine." They carried me through corridors I'd forgotten existed, past faces that blurred together in the torchlight. Nobles in ceremonial dress, their crimson eyes widening as they caught sight of me. Whispers followed like shadows. The Vampire King had abandoned the Crimson Convergence to retrieve something from beneath the town hall. Something that glowed. I must have looked like a corpse. I certainly felt like one. The king, Arcalian, I'd heard someone call him, refused to let anyone else touch me. He carried me himself through the winding passages of what I dimly recognized as the Nocturnus Palace, his jaw set with grim determination. Every time I tried to speak, he told me to save my strength. Every time I closed my eyes, his arms tightened, as though he feared I'd slip away. They brought me to a chamber lined with healing crystals that pulsed with soft amber light. A woman in violet robes approached, her expression carefully neutral as she assessed me. "Your Majesty, if you'll allow me to examine—" "Be quick about it," Arcalian said, finally setting me down on a cushioned bench. But he didn't leave. He stood 3 paces away, his posture rigid, watching. The healer's hands hovered over my arms, and I felt the gentle probe of her magic seeking out injuries, malnutrition, the damage of 7 years in darkness. It should have been soothing. Instead, the moment her power touched mine, something inside me erupted. Light exploded from my skin. Blinding, violent, pure white energy that sent the healer flying backward into the wall. I screamed as power I'd never felt before tore through my veins like liquid fire. The healing crystals shattered. The torches flared so bright they scorched the stone. Arcalian was on me in an instant, his hands gripping my shoulders. "Elowen, look at me!" I couldn't. The light was pouring out of me uncontrollably, and I could feel it burning, destroying everything it touched. I was going to kill someone. I was going to— His hand cupped my face, forcing my glowing eyes to meet his. "Breathe," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Focus on my voice. You're safe. You're not in the darkness anymore." Something about his presence, his touch, acted like an anchor. The light began to dim, retreating back into my skin until I was left trembling and gasping in his arms. The chamber was a wreck, scorch marks on the walls, crystals reduced to dust, the healer unconscious in the corner. "What is she?" someone whispered from the doorway. I looked up to find the entrance crowded with council members, their faces ranging from shock to unmistakable horror. The one who'd spoken, an older vampire with silver streaking his dark hair, pointed at me with a shaking hand. "That creature just attacked a royal healer. She's exactly what we feared she would become." "High Counselor Velthus." Arcalian's voice was dangerously quiet as he helped me sit up. "Choose your next words carefully. She's a hybrid, Your Majesty. A lumivore." Velthus spoke the word like a curse. "We imprisoned her for the safety of the Dominion. Her very existence violates the purity accords. She must be executed immediately before her powers destabilize further." "No." Arcalian stood, positioning himself between me and the council. "You will not touch her." "Your Majesty, you don't understand what she is. I understand perfectly." His voice dropped to a lethal calm. "I also understand that you imprisoned a child without trial, without mercy, and left her to die in conditions no sentient being should endure. That alone is grounds for treason." Velthus's expression hardened. The council voted. It was decided. Then the council overstepped. Arcalian's eyes flashed crimson. "I invoke the sovereign's claim. By ancient law, any individual the king declares under his personal protection cannot be harmed, tried, or executed without his explicit consent. Elowin Varkaris is now under my protection. Any who move against her move against me." The silence that followed was suffocating. The sovereign's claim hadn't been invoked in over 2 centuries. It was absolute and binding. Velthus's jaw clenched. "Your Majesty, why would you risk your throne for a hybrid?" Arcalian didn't answer immediately. I watched his hands curl into fists at his sides, watched the muscle work in his jaw. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "Because she's my mate." The council erupted. Voices overlapped in shock and protest, but I barely heard them. My vision was fracturing, splitting into doubled images. I gasped as something ancient stirred in my blood, and suddenly I wasn't in the healing chamber anymore. I was standing in a forest under a blood-red moon. A woman with my face but different eyes, silver, not glowing, stood beside a man cloaked in shadows. "Our children will bridge 2 worlds," she said. "Light and shadow, vampire and luminary." The vision shifted. I saw a child, me, torn from her mother's arms, saw the council's chambers, heard the word abomination echo through marble halls. Then I was back, collapsing against Arcalian as he caught me. His arms wrapped around me, and I felt his heart racing against my cheek. "I saw it," I whispered. "I saw what I am." His hand cradled the back of my head. "Then you know why I can't let them take you." Above us, the council was still arguing. But in that moment, held by a king who'd defied his entire court for me, I felt something I hadn't felt in 7 years. Hope. The transformation began 3 nights after Arcalian invoked the sovereign's claim. I woke screaming, my body convulsing as something ancient and terrible awakened in my blood. He was there, instantly, as he had been every night since pulling me from the darkness. "Elowin! Stay back!" I gasped, but it was already too late. Light erupted from my skin, but this time it was different. Darker, threaded with tendrils of shadow that writhed like living things. My bones felt like they were breaking and reforming, my blood burning as it rewrote itself into something new. Arcalian ignored my warning and gathered me against his chest, his hand steady even as my power lashed out around us. "I've got you," he murmured against my hair. "Let it happen. Don't fight it. It hurts." "I know." His voice was rough. "But you're not alone this time." The pain crescendoed until I thought I would shatter. And then, silence. The power settled into my bones like it had always belonged there, humming with a resonance that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. When I opened my eyes, I could see things I'd never seen before. Energy patterns flowing through the palace walls, life forces glowing like stars in the darkness beyond. The shadow and light no longer at war within me, but dancing together in perfect, terrible harmony. I lifted my hand and watched shadows coil around my fingers, then dissolve into pure light at my command. "What am I?" Arcalian's expression was equal parts awe and concern. "Fully awakened." Over the following hours, I discovered the extent of what I'd become. I could manipulate light and shadow as easily as breathing. I could sense life energy, what the ancient texts called lumina, and draw sustenance from it without harming the source. I could cut through magical barriers as though they were gossamer. And most disturbing of all, I could access memories that weren't mine, ancestral knowledge flowing through my blood from the luminary who'd come before. It was through those memories that I felt them. Others like me. Trapped. Suffering. Hidden somewhere beneath the palace in chambers even darker than mine had been. "There are more," I whispered, sitting up abruptly. "Other hybrids. Children. They're still down there." Arcalian's expression went cold. "Where?" I closed my eyes, following the thread of connection. "Beneath the west wing, 3 levels down. They've been there for..." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "Years. Some of them for decades." He was already moving toward the door, shouting for his personal guard. I followed on unsteady legs, my newfound power thrumming through me with increasing urgency. Every instinct I possessed screamed that I needed to reach them. Now. The council tried to stop us at the entrance to the West Wing's lower levels. Velthus and 4 other members blocked the corridor, their faces set with grim determination. "Your Majesty, this area is restricted by council decree." Arcalian didn't slow down. "Move! We cannot allow you to..." I felt my power surge in response to my rage, and suddenly I understood exactly what I was capable of. The shadows in the corridor responded to my will, wrapping around the council members and pinning them against the walls. Light blazed from my hands, dissolving the magical locks on the sealed door as though they were made of paper. "Elowen!" Arcalian's voice held a note of warning, but also satisfaction. "They knew," I said, my voice shaking. They all knew. Behind the door lay a nightmare. Cells carved into stone, each one holding a child or young adult in various states of despair. Some had eyes that glowed like mine, blue, violet, silver. Others had marks on their skin that pulsed with suppressed power. All of them looked up at our entrance with expressions of disbelief and desperate hope. "Blessed shadows," Arcalian breathed beside me. There were 11 of them. 11 hybrid children the council had buried alive, just as they'd buried me. Some couldn't have been more than 10 years old. The rage that consumed me then was beyond anything I'd ever felt. Power exploded from my core, a wave of lumivorous energy that shattered every cell door, every binding spell, every trace of the dark magic that had kept these children imprisoned. Light and shadow merged into something transcendent, flowing through the chamber like a cleansing fire. The children stumbled out of their cells, blinking in the sudden brightness. A girl who couldn't have been more than 12 looked up at me with glowing amber eyes. "Are you real?" I knelt in front of her, tears streaming down my face. "I'm real. And you're free now. All of you." Above us, I could feel the palace erupting into chaos. The wave of power I'd released had been felt throughout the Dominion. Impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. Nobles were gathering in the Great Hall, their voices raised in fear and fury. Some demanded our immediate execution. Others, having felt the raw truth of what I'd revealed, were calling for the council's arrest. The kingdom was fracturing before our eyes, divided between those who saw us as abominations and those who recognized us as victims of an ancient injustice. Archelion placed his hand on my shoulder as I helped the children stand. "This changes everything." "I know." I looked at the 11 faces watching me with a mixture of terror and reverence. Behind them, I could hear the sounds of the palace guard approaching, could feel the building pressure of the political storm about to break over our heads. A boy with silver-streaked hair and violet eyes stepped forward. "What happens to us now?" I looked at Archelion, then back at the children who'd survived what I'd survived. "Now," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands, "we fight for our right to exist." The young girl who'd asked if I was real took my hand. "Together?" I squeezed her fingers gently, feeling the echo of her power, so similar to mine, resonate between us. Together. The kingdom might be fracturing, but we were whole. And for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't alone in the darkness anymore. Neither were they. They assembled the full council in the grand chamber at dawn, every member required to attend by royal decree. I stood beside Archelion at the base of the throne dais, the 11 freed children arranged protectively behind us. The nobles who'd gathered to witness filled the gallery above, their whispers creating a constant hum of tension that vibrated through the vaulted space. High Counselor Velthus stood at the center of the council's semicircle, his expression carefully neutral. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way his gaze kept flickering to the children and then away, as though denying their existence. Archelion's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Explain to me how 11 hybrid children came to be imprisoned beneath this palace without the king's knowledge or consent." "Your Majesty," Velthus began, his tone measured, "these detentions were authorized under the Purity Accords, enacted by your grandfather during the Shadow Wars. The Council has full authority to—" "The Purity Accords," I interrupted, my voice ringing clear despite my pounding heart, "were designed to prevent vampires from creating hybrids through forbidden blood magic. They say nothing about imprisoning children who were born, not made." Velthus's eyes snapped to me with barely concealed contempt. "You dare speak in these proceedings. She has every right." Archelion's hand moved to the small of my back, a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by the watching crowd. "As do all the victims of your crimes. Continue, Elowen." I stepped forward, drawing on the ancestral memories that had awakened with my transformation. "I've seen the truth in the blood memories of the Luminary. You didn't just imprison us. You studied us, harvested from us." I turned to face the gallery, projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "Show them!" I reached deep into my power and pulled forth the images buried in my genetic memory, projecting them into the air above us like ghostly visions. The crowd gasped as they saw children strapped to tables, council healers drawing glowing blood into crystalline vials. Saw the same blood being distilled into potions, woven into enchantments, used to fuel magic that should have been impossible. "Lumivore blood," I said, my voice shaking with rage, can enhance vampire abilities, extend lifespans, break curses that would otherwise be permanent. For decades, you've been harvesting us like livestock, telling yourselves it was for the good of the Dominion. Lies! Councillor Thane shouted from the left. The hybrid spreads falsehoods. Then explain this. Archaelian nodded to his captain of the guard, who stepped forward carrying a locked chest. When opened, it revealed dozens of vials filled with luminescent liquid. Found in the private chambers of 3 council members, along with ledgers documenting transactions dating back 40 years. The silence that followed was deafening. Velthis's mask finally cracked. You don't understand what you've done, boy king. Those children weren't just imprisoned, they were contained. Do you have any idea what a fully awakened Lumivore is capable of? They could tear this kingdom apart. Like I'm doing now? I asked softly. Exactly like. He stopped, realizing his mistake. You imprisoned us because you feared our power, I continued. But you also needed that power, so you kept us weak, starving, barely alive, just conscious enough to harvest from. I looked at the girl with amber eyes behind me, remembering how frail she'd been when I found her. Some of them are so young, they don't even remember the world above ground. A voice rang out from the gallery. Is this true, High Counselor? Have you been lying to us for decades? Before Velthis could answer, Councillor Thane moved. I caught the glint of silver a heartbeat before he lunged. Not at me, but at Archaelian. A blade coated in nightshade poison, lethal even to vampire kings, flashed toward Archaelian's exposed throat. Time seemed to fracture. I felt my power explode outward on pure instinct. Shadow tendrils wrapped around Thane's arm mid-strike, while light blazed from my other hand to form a shield between him and Archaelian. The poisoned blade stopped inches from the king's skin, held suspended in a web of luminous energy. The grand chamber erupted into chaos. Guards rushed forward, but I was faster. I channeled my power through the connection I'd established with Thane, flooding his body with raw, lumivorous energy. Not to kill, though I could have, but to illuminate. His skin began to glow, and suddenly everyone could see what I saw. The dark magic woven through his veins, the council's mark burned into his heart, binding him to their will. An assassin bound by blood oath, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. How many more do you have, Velthis? How many council members were you willing to sacrifice to maintain your secrets? Thane collapsed. The magic sustaining him dissolved. Archaelian stood rigid beside me, his hand finding mine and gripping it tightly. I could feel the rage emanating from him in waves. Velthis, he said, his voice deadly calm. You ordered an assassination attempt on your king in open court. Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you executed where you stand. The High Counselor looked around at his fellow council members, perhaps seeking support, but most of them were backing away, faces pale with shock or fear. Some, I realized, genuinely hadn't known the full extent of the corruption. Your Majesty! A voice called from the gallery. An elderly vampire with kind eyes and scholar's robes stood. May I speak? Archaelian nodded. I am Keeper Meridian of the Archives. 3 days ago, after these revelations began, I searched the oldest texts. He descended to the chamber floor, carrying an ancient tome bound in silver and midnight blue. There is a prophecy, one the council has kept hidden for centuries. He opened the book, and I saw text written in a language I somehow understood, the old tongue of the luminary. When shadow and light unite in the blood of the Forsaken, when the buried queen rises from beneath the throne, the Dominion shall face its reckoning. Only through her mercy shall the kingdom be reborn." The words hung in the air like a benediction and a curse. Keeper Meridian looked directly at me. "You are the buried queen, child, the one the prophecy foretold." I felt Arcalian's hand tighten around mine as murmurs spread through the chamber. Velthus had gone very pale. "The council knew," the keeper continued. "They've known since you were born. That's why they buried you. They feared the prophecy would come to pass, that acknowledging you would force them to face their crimes." I looked at the High Counselor, at the guilt and fear finally breaking through his composed facade. "Kneel," I said softly. "I will not." Light and shadow erupted around me, not violently, but with undeniable authority. The power of every hybrid in the room resonated with mine, amplifying it until the very air shimmered with luminescence. I felt the connection to something older than the dominion itself, felt the weight of prophecy settling onto my shoulders like a crown. "Kneel," I repeated, and this time my voice carried the echoes of 100 luminary ancestors. "Not before me, before them." I gestured to the 11 children behind us. Slowly, one by one, the council members sank to their knees. Even Velthus, pride finally breaking, lowered himself before the children he'd condemned to darkness. Arcalian's voice was quiet beside me. "What now, buried queen?" I looked at the kneeling council, at the watching nobles, at the children whose lives had been stolen. "Now," I said, "we rebuild, not on secrets and fear, but on truth." "And mercy?" he asked. I thought of the 7 years in darkness, of the children who'd suffered even longer. "Mercy," I agreed, though the word tasted bitter. "But also justice. Real justice." The prophecy had been spoken. The kingdom had fractured. But from those fractures, something new could grow. If we were brave enough to let it. They came at nightfall, when the Dominion was still reeling from the Council's exposure. I was in the Eastern Gardens with the younger hybrid children when I felt it, a rupture in the veil between worlds, like reality itself was tearing open. "Get inside," I commanded, pushing the children toward the palace. "Now!" The sky above Nocturnus began to darken with something that wasn't night. Shadows poured through rifts in the air itself, coalescing into creatures I'd only seen in nightmares and ancestral memories, Shadeborn. Beings of pure darkness that fed on fear and despair, banished from this realm centuries ago during the Shadow Wars. Arcalian appeared at my side, already armed, his crimson eyes scanning the unnatural darkness spreading across the sky. "How many?" "Hundreds," I whispered. "Maybe more." The palace bells rang out in warning. Vampire nobles who'd been celebrating the council's downfall now scrambled for weapons. The royal guard formed defensive positions along the walls, but I could see it in their faces. They knew what Shadeborn were capable of. The last time these creatures had invaded, it had taken 3 kingdoms and a decade of war to drive them back. The first wave hit the outer walls with devastating force. Shadeborn warriors materialized from pools of living shadow, their forms constantly shifting between solid and ethereal. Normal weapons passed through them uselessly. Vampire magic, usually so potent, barely slowed them down. But then something else emerged from the largest rift, and my blood went cold. A figure stepped through, tall and regal, wrapped in robes that seemed woven from midnight itself. His face was achingly familiar, the same silver blonde hair as mine, the same sharp cheekbones, but his eyes glowed with pure shadow, ancient and merciless. "Elowen!" His voice carried across the battlefield, amplified by dark magic. "My daughter, At last, you've awakened. Arcalian's hand found my arm. You know him. Lord Malakorin, I breathed. My father. But he's supposed to be dead. Dead? Malakorin laughed, the sound echoing off the palace walls. No, child. I've been waiting for you to finally become what you were always meant to be. The bridge between shadow and light. The key to breaking the veil permanently. He descended through the air as though walking on invisible steps, his shade-born army parting before him. When he reached the palace gates, he stopped, his shadowed gaze finding mine even across the distance. Your mother was luminary nobility, he called out. Did they tell you that when they buried you? Did they explain that she sacrificed everything to birth you, a child who could wield both her light and my darkness? His expression hardened. They murdered her for it. The same council that imprisoned you. They killed her and told me she died in childbirth. Then they took you from me. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt Arcalian tense beside me, felt the ancestral memories stirring, confirming the truth I'd been too afraid to fully see. So you brought an army to slaughter them? I shouted back. To destroy the entire dominion? I brought an army to free you. His voice cracked with genuine emotion. Everything I've done, every alliance with Shadow, every dark ritual, has been to grow strong enough to tear down these walls and pull you from the darkness they trapped you in. But you did it yourself. You awakened. Pride flickered across his face. Now join me. Together, we can reshape this world. No more prisons, no more lies. For a heartbeat, I was tempted. This was my father, a man who'd fought for decades to reach me, a man whose blood ran in my veins. Then I looked at the shade-born army behind him, at the terror on the faces of the vampire nobles, at the hybrid children huddled in the palace who'd just begun to taste freedom. At Arcalian beside me, the king who'd defied his entire kingdom to protect me. No, I said quietly. Malakorin's expression shifted to disappointment, then resignation. Then I'll take you by force. The Shadeborn surged forward. Arcalian's hand found mine as chaos erupted around us. Together? He asked, echoing the words I'd spoken to the hybrid children. Together, I confirmed. We moved as one into the battle. Arcalian's centuries of combat experience made him a whirlwind of lethal grace, his enhanced vampire strength tearing through Shadeborn with brutal efficiency. But I was something new, something the enemy hadn't prepared for. I let my power explode outward, no longer restraining it or fearing what it might do. Light blazed from my hands, searing through shadow creatures that had seemed invincible moments before. But I also called upon the darkness in my blood, my father's gift, and commanded the shadows themselves to turn against their masters. The battlefield transformed into a light show of war. Where my light touched, Shadeborn dissolved. Where my shadow commanded, their own darkness betrayed them. I could feel the hybrid children in the palace adding their power to mine, creating a resonance that made the very air hum with energy. Malakorin watched from above, his expression cycling through shock, pride, and growing desperation. When he finally joined the battle himself, it was with power that made the earlier assault look like a skirmish. Father and daughter met in the center of the courtyard, light and shadow colliding with enough force to crack the ancient stone beneath our feet. His darkness was old and vast, accumulated over centuries. But my power was something he'd never anticipated. True balance, light and shadow in perfect harmony rather than constant war. You could have had everything, he roared, his shadow form expanding. I would have given you kingdoms. You would have given me revenge, I countered, our powers locked in a spiral of competing forces. That's not the same thing. Around us, the tide of battle was turning. Arcalion had rallied the vampire forces, and the hybrid children had emerged from the palace despite my orders, their combined power creating barriers that the Shadeborn couldn't penetrate. The council members who'd survived their disgrace fought with desperate fury, perhaps seeking redemption. But I kept my focus on my father, on the man who'd loved me enough to wage war for me, but not enough to understand what I truly needed. Stand down, I said, channeling both light and shadow through our connection. Please, I don't want to hurt you. Then don't. His voice softened. Join me. We're family, Elowen. All I've ever wanted was to protect you. By destroying everything else, I felt tears streaming down my face. That's not protection. That's possession. I released the full extent of my power then, not to destroy him, but to show him what I truly was. Light and shadow merged into something transcendent, a force that was neither and both. It swept across the battlefield like a cleansing wave, not obliterating the Shadeborn, but severing their connection to this realm, sending them back through the rifts they'd emerged from. Malakoran staggered as his army vanished, his power suddenly cut off from its source. He fell to his knees in the courtyard, and I caught him before he could collapse completely. I could kill you, I whispered, supporting his weight. The kingdom would demand it. He looked up at me with eyes that were suddenly just silver, the shadow receding. For the first time, I saw him as he must have been before grief and rage consumed him, just a man who'd lost everything. Then do it, he said. I have nothing left. You have me. The words came out broken. If you'll accept me as I am, not as a weapon or a key, but as your daughter who chooses mercy over vengeance. His expression crumbled. Elowen, I'm not forgiving what you've done, I said firmly, but I'm offering you a chance at redemption, the same chance I was given. Behind me, I felt Arcalion's presence, steady and supportive. The hybrid children gathered closer, their power humming in harmony with mine. The Dominion's forces had stopped fighting, watching this moment with held breath. Malakoran looked at me for a long moment, then slowly bowed his head. I don't deserve your mercy. No, I agreed, but you're going to accept it anyway. The battlefield fell silent except for the crackling of fading magic and the groans of the wounded. The war had lasted less than an hour, but it had changed everything. I stood between my father and my king, between shadow and light, between vengeance and mercy, and I chose the harder path. I always would. 3 months after the Shadeborn invasion, I stood in the Grand Chamber once more, but this time I wore a crown. The ceremony was unlike anything the Dominion had witnessed before. Traditional vampire rites blended with ancient luminary blessings, shadow and light woven together in the vows Arcalion. And I spoke. The hybrid children I'd freed stood as witnesses, their glowing eyes reflecting the hundreds of candles that lit the hall. Even my father attended, bound by magical oaths and guarded, but present, a shadow of what he'd been, seeking the redemption I'd offered. When Arcalion placed the crown upon my head, wrought from both silver and obsidian, embedded with crystals that pulsed with lumivorous energy, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. I present to you, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall, Elowen Varkaris Dravenheart, Queen of Nocturnus Dominion, Bride of blood and light, Protector of all kindred. The applause that followed wasn't universal. Some nobles still harbored fear of what I represented. But it was genuine, and it was growing. The kingdom was learning, slowly, that hybrids weren't the threat they'd been taught to believe. The council had been restructured. Velthus and those who'd orchestrated the harvesting were imprisoned, facing trial for their crimes. New members had been appointed, including 2 hybrids and a Luminari ambassador who'd arrived from the Eastern realms once word of my existence spread. The Purity Accords had been rewritten, transformed from a weapon of oppression into actual protection for all bloodlines. Integration hadn't been easy. The 11 children I'd freed were still recovering, learning to live in sunlight and open spaces after years of darkness. Some nights I woke to find them gathered in my chambers, seeking comfort from someone who understood their nightmares. I always welcomed them, remembering my own 7 years of isolation. But there was joy, too. The youngest girl, the one with amber eyes, had laughed for the first time last week. The sound had been so unexpected, so pure, that everyone in the courtyard had stopped to listen. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration began, Arcalian drew me aside to a balcony overlooking the Dominion. The city below sparkled with both firelight and the gentle glow of lumivorous magic, no longer hidden, but welcomed. "Regrets?" he asked, his hand finding mine. I thought about the girl I'd been in the darkness, alone and dying. Thought about the power I'd feared and the choices I'd made. None. He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually stern face. "Good, because I have something to show you." He led me to the archives, where Keeper Meridian waited with an ancient scroll I'd never seen before. The elderly scholar's hands trembled slightly as he unrolled it. "Your Majesty," he addressed me directly now, the title still strange to my ears. "After your coronation, I continued my research into the prophecy. There's more." The text revealed itself in the old tongue, and I read the words that had been hidden for centuries. "The buried queen shall rise and choose mercy over vengeance, uniting shadow and light. But her reign is only the threshold. When she bears a child of 3 bloods, vampire, luminary, and shadeborn, the ancient seals shall break, and the true transformation shall begin." My hand moved instinctively to my stomach. Too early to know for certain, but I'd felt something changing in my blood these past weeks, something new taking root. Arcalian's eyes widened as he followed my gesture. "Elowen? I don't know yet," I whispered. "But if the prophecy is true, then our child will be something the world has never seen," Keeper Meridian finished quietly. "The true bridge between all realms." I looked out the archive window at the kingdom we were rebuilding, at the people learning to coexist, at the future we were creating from the ashes of ancient hatred. The prophecy promised transformation, but it didn't specify what kind. That would be up to us. Arcalian's arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me close. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together." I leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against my back, feeling the power humming through my veins, light and shadow in perfect balance. "Together," I agreed. Below us, the Dominion celebrated its new queen. Above us, stars wheeled through an endless sky. And within me, perhaps, a new prophecy was beginning. The buried queen had risen, but the story was far from over. It was only just beginning.